Yes, what's good guys, Ben's here. Welcome back to my studio. So today I'm going to be covering one of my all-time favorite plugins. This one's called ShaperBox. It's a Swiss Army knife in the sound design world. It's got some great features. What we're going to do, jump onto the whiteboard, quickly show you how it works, show you the interface, because when I first looked at it, I was a bit confused, but don't worry, it'll all make sense after that. Then we're going to go over into Studio One, see it live in the action. I'm actually going to use an example of one of the tracks I've already made, Balance, and I'll show you how I use it in a track and how it can help you with your music production. Let's dive in.
I can't accept jungle. We need jump up, I'm afraid.
So here we are, trusty whiteboard. This is a ShaperBox version 3. So this plugin is essentially a Swiss Army knife, as I said, and you can achieve a lot in your sound design with this. You can load in various modules into this one plugin and create some really creative effects. I use it quite a lot for just mix down and also sidechaining. So this one here, shown in the yellow, is the volume module, but you're able to load in various different modules along this bar at the top, and it's got like filters, reverbs. I'll show you all the effects in a minute, but I think it's best to start if we just quickly go over the plugin top to bottom and just explain a quick overview of some of the features. So we're able to have presets here. You can affect the master mix there, as well as the mix of the individual module there. As I said, we can add modules, so you can layer up effects and create an effect chain. And this box here in the middle is essentially where most of the action's happening, and this box in the middle is kind of like an LFO, so you can trigger it using various trigger mechanisms. So you can have it triggered by MIDI, audio, or you can set up sidechaining in it as well, so you can have a signal from like a kick or a snare or drums or a bass and have it affect the LFO and the timing of it. So we have some other presets for shapers down here at the bottom as well, and you can also create your own. I don't really use those too much, but you can get really cool like rhythm effects. So that's essentially a quick overview of the plugin. As I said, this kind of box in the middle is where all the action happens, so depending on what effect you're going to get, this would be like a dry wet knob, volume, or some other function within the plugin. So let's quickly move on to the effects. So one of the really cool things about this plugin is being able to layer up multiple effects and create a chain. So it's a single plugin and it's extremely powerful. Each of these modules, so you kind of have a tape delay or like a pitch effect. You can do like pitch stops with it, kind of tape, I guess, for time. You got a drive, use standard distortion, clippers, that kind of thing. Quite nice for adding a bit of grit. You've got noise, which you can add texture over elements. Really handy for like adding like bits of noise in the end of a snare, or like to the sub to get that kind of wobbly, noisy sub. You've got a filter you can modulate, so you can put it over effects and have a filter movement depending on what LFO you put. Got liquid, which is like your phaser, flanges, that kind of thing. Crush, bit crushing, so you can add a bit crushing effect. I will go in a bit more detail on some of these, but I won't go over the top of all of them. I'll be here for weeks, but maybe in another video I'll go in a bit more detail in each of these modules, but I'll show you a few of them today, so don't worry. Panning, so we can pan stuff left or right. Reverb's really cool in this. Actually, you can add ducking effects to the side chain signals and have it kind of automate your reverb and duck your tails, which is really cool. And then width is all about mid-side, so you're able to tune the mid and the side of the frequency, and also do some automation from the audio input follower, so it will follow your audio and create some cool effects. I'll show you that in a bit anyway, so don't worry. Let's move on to the sidechaining function, because I think that's a really cool function. So one of the really useful functions of this plugin is the sidechain input. So if we want to have the signal affected by like a kick or something to do like a duck or a rhythm or some type of change in the volume in this example, then we just enable this side input here, and you can click this configuration button and then it gives you more options to basically fine tune the threshold of that sample. So when a kick hits, you want to have it trigger when a kick hits or a snare hits. I'll show you that in a bit more detail, but I just wanted to show you this page and how you can get sidechain into it. So in Studio One, you essentially click the sidechain button, choose your channel, maybe different depending on what DAW you're using. And that's a quick overview. I want to show you it now because I think it's all well and good seeing it, but what does it do? Does it sound great? And I've got some good examples. We're going to check out some drums and some percussion because the volume module is really good at like tightening things up. I've got snare I process, and I'll show you some examples from a track. So let's dive into Studio One and have a quick look. So here we are, ShaperBox. Now we're going to start off with a really easy example to hear how the volume function works on this plugin. And basically this yellow line controls the volume. So from 100% to 0%, max volume, lowest volume, and we can move this and affect the sound. And every time the sound plays, it will re-trigger this LFO. So let's play the sound, and what you're listening for is it getting like tied to the hat. So we can create any sound, really dial in that tail just by changing this slider. Now if you notice, every time the hat hits, this audio is triggering. So rather than having to go in and edit each individual sample, we can use this module to kind of fine tune any sample to how we want it to sound. You can have a really tight hat or a really splashy hat, but it's just an easy example to kind of hear it like without too much complexity. I'm going to show you another example of a snare which has got loads of reverb on, and how I've tightened up a snare to get ready in the mix in one of my tracks. So here's an example of a snare. So we've got unprocessed, processed, and I've also processed a bit more on top. So the first snare, it's kind of loads of reverb to it. And then I've used ShaperBox to tighten it up. Now, one thing I didn't explain in the intro is the multi-band feature. So you can enable band by band use of the LFO. So in this example, I've kind of tightened up the low end a bit tighter on the mids and also the highs, but I've left the tail on the highs. So if we play that, this is the kind of effect we get now. So I've just really tightened it up. So especially if you're making D&B or like music that has lots of elements going on, you really don't want those big tails. You want to keep them in. You end up muddying up your mix. But if you take the processing on this one step further and adding a transient and a clipper, we get a nice full snare without the reverb. So when we then play that in the mix, that'll be sounding much better in the mix. So another example of how ShaperBox can be used is across like samples or breaks, or you can have a whole DAW full of audio sounds on one channel, and you can affect all of those audio files on that channel. So rather than having to go in and manually make edits, you can affect the whole channel, and using the trigger function, it will trigger on each hip. So in this example, I've got an amen break, and before it kind of sounds really splashy, and then after I've applied the processing on ShaperBox, it's just tightened it up and made it a bit more punchy. So let's quickly play it without the plugin, and then now with the plugin, without, with. So it gets the break just, it's much more tighter and punchier. It's definitely worth experimenting with. You have to kind of play around with this the LFO. So if we could make it sound more splashy or tighter. So if we move it in, you can get like a really tight break, and then if we bring it out, we could get anything in between here. And really dial in what sort of transient you want. So yeah, amazing on amen breaks. or even any break. Okay, I grabbed some samples from Splice just to show you a couple of examples of how ShaperBox is being used, and I've created a chain over this jungle respace. So jungle respace sounds like this on its own, and then I've added this on top, and it's basically destroyed the sound and really gritted it up, made it a lot more distorted and fuller. ShaperBox is really good with respaces because it has dynamic envelopes, so as stuff moves and the reese moves, you can just have this sort of move along with the bass. So for example, you see that waveform, you can make it move to that waveform. If we look at the distortion, I've actually applied it here. So it's essentially reacting to the sound, and you can change this amount knob to how dirty you want it. I've also got filter over the top of it, so giving it a bit more movement, some noise, adding some crispy top end, and then the crusher finally, which adds that really crispy top end. So quickly just show the crusher. So this is without, and then with, gives you those really crispy top end sort of frequencies. And I've just got another example over here as well. I just made a quick track and I've put it on this respace at the end I've made. So I'll quickly show the reason and we'll put it all together for context. Ooh. So that's with the processing, and then this is without. So it's a lot more fat, fuller, big reverb. And if we play this in context of the track, give you some idea of what you can achieve with this plugin. So there you go, that's some more examples of ShaperBox. It's actually a sick plugin, good for sound design and, you know, creating different transients on your samples. So I've just got a final example here of using the volume module in an application of one of my tracks. Now, it's so cool because you can play a sample through it using the sidechain function, and you can create custom sidechaining curves. And if you can see with this waveform, we've actually got a waveform of the kick, so we can really dial in and just have the kick play. And in here I've got an 808 bass, and every time the kick hits I want to just duck the bass and just have the kick, so I've got the impact and then I still keep the tail. So let's just play this sub on its own, and you can see it moving and the kick hitting and it ducking every time it hits. If you put the kick in, so what that's allowing it to do is the kick to be more focused and more upfront. And I'll disable it and see if you can hear the difference. When the kick hits, it's just not as present. And then we're going to add it back on. And that just brings the kick. It makes such a difference. It's something I use a lot in all of my tracks. So sidechaining and then creating a custom curve to, you know, duck the sub how you want it to. It's definitely a modern replacement to sidechain compression. I'm going to do a bit more of a deep dive into sidechain compression in another video, but I think that's a quick overview of the volume feature in ShaperBox. So there we have it. That's a quick dive into ShaperBox and how I'm using it in my production. Fingers crossed you could take this information away and help with your own music production. But if you do have any questions, please let me know in the comments. And if you found it useful, don't forget to hit that like button. Like I said, I will be doing some more dives into the ShaperBox. Each module is quite complex. It has its own, I guess, application, but don't worry. Make sure you get subscribed and I'll be explaining more about this plugin. But if you found it useful, do let me know and I'll catch you in the next video.